How many times did you meet with him?
I met with him about at least 15 times. I sat down, I said, "Did you kill him?" We sat down, I said, "Mr. President, you got to get control of these guys, i.e., security, the mukhabarat. You got
Yeah.
to get control of these guys, or else they're going to come back to haunt you. Until
Yeah.
this injustice is done." And sometimes they start crying. It became such an emotional,
Wow.
a very emotional issue.
Dr. Lesch, it's a pleasure to have you on our program. Thank you for taking the time for this conversation with me. So, in 2000, Hafez al-Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, suddenly dies as he's in the middle of a phone conversation with the prime minister of Lebanon. What happens next? Are Syrians apprehensive about turmoil, about their safety, about their country? How do they react?
Well, they were very upset, many of them, and just shocked in a way because he had been around for so long. On the other hand, he had been ill for a number of years, and so it was not that much of a surprise.
Oh,
In fact, there was something of a race against time to prepare his second son, of course, Bashar al-Assad, for power and to succeed him before, and surround him with enough support before the father died.
kind of like
And one
groom
could
him to be heir.
exactly,
Yeah.
and one could say that it was barely, barely enough time. But yeah, people were, again, at the time they were upset about this only because it's what they're used to,
Yeah.
and such state-controlled media and propaganda and so forth. And as you know, in countries like this that are state-controlled, authoritarian countries, once one group starts grieving or celebrating, depending on what the occasion is, celebrating Bashar's first reelection or grieving over his father's death, other groups tend to form and tend to get in line because they don't want to be seen as not appropriately grieving or appropriately celebrating, because they may be seen as being, dissidents or something like that. So, part of it was genuine, and part of it, was just following along with the crowd, probably. But the inner circle had been waiting for this, especially in the military security apparatus.
Yeah.
They had tabbed Bashar al-Assad, of course, his older brother, who had been probably earmarked to succeed his father, had died in a car accident in 1994, and Bashar was brought back from
Was that
uh,
a genuine car accident or was that something? Is there?
everything. Yeah, I know it's a good question,
Yeah.
and ultimately we won't know, but everything I have heard and studied and everyone I've talked to suggests it was a real accident, and he was quite the opposite of Bashar. He drove fast cars, he was charismatic, and apparently he was driving a fast car on the way to Damascus International Airport, and there's a roundabout there that I've approached at the same time in the morning that he approached it, and there's a fog,
Oh,
typically.
wow.
And so he apparently just lost control, went into the roundabout, and tumbled over several times. So I could definitely see it as real. But the military security apparatus, again, expecting the father not to last all that long, tabbed his son. And essentially, from what I understand from talking with a number of these people, is that Mustafa Talas, the longtime defense minister under Hafez al-Assad, basically got the generals together and said, "We're getting Bashar al-Assad in power." Now, this is quite contrary to what the Constitution says, because there is a vice president. Abdul Halim Khadem was vice president. And usually, when there's a vice president, when the president dies, the vice president takes over.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But he is a Sunni Muslim, very loyal to his father, but it had been known that some of the Sunni Muslims in the regime, and of course, as you know, the Assads are Alawite, and
Yeah.
most of the military security apparatus and most important posts are filled by Alawites, but there were some prominent Sunnis, and he was one of them. And it was known that he did not particularly think Bashar would be suited for power, even before the father's death. So he was essentially cast aside, and he, remained as vice president until he was basically kicked out in the summer of 2005.
Dr. Lesch, was
Yeah.
was there any discussion at this point in 2000 that, well, if Bashar, the son, becomes the next president, this is pretty much a monarchy? Was
Yeah,
did anyone
yeah.
discuss that or no? I mean,
The,
this
the
is the Middle East and no one really.
yeah, exactly. What was it? Roger Owen, the well-known modern Middle East scholar, finished his days at Harvard University. He wrote a very interesting book called Arab Republican Presidents for Life, or something like that. And it's that very same thing, is that
Yeah,
it's supposed to be a republic with, a line of succession. I mean, constitutionally ordained succession plan and all of this sort of thing. But they, in fact, become monarchies when the sons, succeed the father. And
yeah.
Gaddafi probably wanted to do it. Mubarak probably wanted to do it before they were overthrown due to the Arab Spring.
And they didn't even in Azerbaijan, which is not an Arab
Yeah,
country,
yeah,
but so
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, in essence, it's family rule. It's in essence, it's a monarchy.
So Bashar is groomed and then eventually becomes president.
Hmm.
How do ordinary Syrians receive him? What do they think of him?
They actually thought he was a breath of fresh air, and because
Breath of fresh air. Wow.
the state propaganda machine had done its job beforehand. He was different even before he became president, and certainly after he became president. He and his cosmopolitan wife, Asma al-Assad, who's was brought up in London, who worked on Wall Street, very different type of presentation and style than his parents, Hafez al-Assad and his wife. And they used to drive around in modest cars on their own without apparent bodyguards, go to restaurants. She was much more out front, and he eschewed the cult-like propaganda that had developed around his father. And so when he came to power, he was called the Hope. Amal. He was called the Hope in
Hope.
Arabic even before he became president. And so there was a lot of hope. And as I write in many different venues, there was something called the Damascus Spring in the few months after he came to office, where
So we're talking 2000, 2001.
2000, yeah,
Yeah.
2000 to 2001, where uh, he freed up the state media apparatus, and they could criticize the government more so. Uh, the same, with TV and in print. Released some political prisoners. Allowed the formation of political salons and forums that could criticize the government. And this had never been allowed before, certainly not in recent memory. And so, this Damascus Spring occurred, and the Syrians themselves called it this, and it seemed to, augur in a new era, and that Bashar, in fact, was this guy.
Dr. Lesch, when you
Yeah.
say they were allowed to criticize the government,
Hmm.
was that everyone below Bashar?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. 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 That's
Yeah, that was a line too far even for him, I think.
yeah. You see
But
that
of
in
course,
many Middle Eastern countries. For example, in Jordan, you can criticize
sure.
the government, but you cannot criticize the
Right.
Hashemite family. I
Correct.
see. I
Exactly.
see.
Exactly. Same sort of thing. So it was to a point. But even in his inaugural speech, when he accepted the presidency, without naming his father, but he said previous economic policies and previous, reform efforts had failed and so forth. So he actually deigned to criticize his father indirectly.
Wow.
So
Okay.
all of these things, and plus, he liked the toys of the West, in terms of computers. He was head of the Syrian Computer Society. They, like Al Gore, I guess he claimed to bring internet to Syria. He liked Western music. Of course, he was studying, basically getting board certified in ophthalmology in the Western Eye Hospital in London when his brother died, and when Bashar was called back. So he loved I remember the first time I met him after the niceties and I explained what I was doing, writing the biography, The New Lion of Damascus, that came out in 2005. And I first met him in the summer of 2004. And, I said, Mr. President, the worst thing you ever did upon becoming president is that you made it known that you like Phil Collins music and Electric Light Orchestra. And first he looked at me. Yeah, he looked at me. It's like, this is the guy we're bringing in to allow in to interview me and everything. But I explained it to him and he understood is that he created this impression that he was this reformist, pro-West leader that was going to change Syria simply because he liked Western music and liked computers and stuff like that and the latest Western photography equipment. The thing that what they didn't understand, and something again I've written about quite frequently, is that he was a child of the Arab-Israeli conflict. He was a child of the tumult in Lebanon. He was a child of the superpower Cold War. And most importantly, he was a child of Hafez al-Assad.
Yeah.
These were the things that really framed and guided his perception of the world and the way he, viewed power and all of these things, and the nature of threat, rather than spending a few months in London. So.
That was kind of like the sheen, the veneer.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was something behind it. I mean, it wasn't totally just trapping, but as time went on, you could see that these other influences were as, or certainly more important than these Western proclivities toward the West that he had displayed early in his youth.
How many times did you meet with him?
I met with him about at least 15 times. Uh, yeah,
Wow.
and a lot of those meetings were 2, 3 hours long. And first to do the biography, and so he was doing this. He said, "I'll give you as much time as you want." Now, when the book was published in 2005, I thought, well, I guess I won't see him anymore. But at his suggestion, he wanted to continue to see me because at that time in 2005, if you recall, there was the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq,
Yeah.
and Syria was identified by the Bush administration as on the other side. It's on the wrong side of history. They said they were
Hmm.
allowing jihadists into Iraq and so forth. And so there, Syria was isolated, and I became something of an unofficial liaison between Damascus and Washington, which I did. And I met with, a number of U.S. officials during those years and, communicating thoughts, ideas, and impressions and not, I'd say, specific policy or anything like that. But he was very, concerned about giving a good impression of Syria and himself to the West, and obviously I was seen as perhaps a vehicle for that. But yeah, these meetings, since he was so isolated, though, he had no one else to see. The only people I had to compete with were like Ahmadinejad in Iran, or perhaps the various Russian official who may come in.
Yeah.
So, I always got treated very well by the protocol office because there was really no one else to to bring it to.
Was it always English, or did you ever switch to Arabic with him?
No, it was always English. In the beginning, his English was better than my Arabic,
Hmm.
frankly, and he wanted to work on his English.
Yeah.
In the first couple of years we met, 2004, 2005, he always had this wonderful English literature professor who would be present. And just in case he couldn't think of a word in English, he would say it in Arabic to him and he would translate it. But
Wow.
in the later times I met him, there was no translator or anything. His English was very good.
Did you ever discuss anything, or did he bring up anything to you that was beyond country and politics? Anything that intimate that you went away and thinking, oh my God, my head is spinning. I can't believe I just
Well, one
heard
occasion,
this.
One occasion, and he often talked about his family. Of course, as anybody, especially in the Arab world, you ask how your family is. They tell you about
Yeah.
your kids, and I tell them about my kids, and so I learned about that. He was very much a family man. But one time, he actually sang a couple of lines of "Itsy Bitsy Spider" to me, uh, only because he was complaining. Because I asked how was his son doing. At the time, he only had one kid, Hafez,
Yeah.
and he said, "Oh, he's fine, except I'm going crazy with this song he's learning at school. And it's called Itsy Bitsy Spider." And so he just started singing it, and he said, "I'm going nuts
That's
with this song." So, those are some of the human touches and
yeah.
that endeared him to many people because he was much more open in that way than his father ever had been. Not quite like that, but
Yeah, yeah.
at another level with the public and giving interviews and stuff like that.
It's hard to reconcile even before my conversation with you that we're having right now. It's hard to reconcile his his facial features, his demeanor with the prisons that are being liberated right now
Yeah,
in Syria, right?
yeah.
Did that ever occur to you? Did you ever think of that as like his person is probably someone that is um, I'm speculating here, Dr. Lesch, you help
Mhm.
me.
Sure.
Meek or calm. I may have a cup of coffee or a beer with him in New
Yeah.
York or Philadelphia. Here
Yeah.
he is, a total dictator.
Yeah, absolutely. There's
Yeah,
this dichotomy, this disassociation in a way, and because he was very humble, very unpretentious,
yeah,
gregarious, mild-mannered, meek, as you said. I talked to a number of U.S. officials, friends of mine over the years, who had met with guys like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi and Bashar al-Assad, three now notorious Middle East dictators
yeah, yeah, yeah.
have been overthrown. And to a person, they all said, Bashar's different. He's normal. He seems like a good guy,
Oh, that's just
and
crazy.
and that's the impression, he gave. But I'm sure we'll get to this more, but I certainly saw him change in a way over the years. I mean, I met with him on a consistent basis between 2004 and 2009. So I kept going to Damascus and meeting with U.S. and Syrian officials up to and actually during the Syrian civil war, but I stopped seeing him around 2009. And I could see him become much more comfortable with power. And, he was awkward at first with all of this. I remember again, that first couple of times I met him, he said one time, I've issued 100 decrees and only four of them been implemented. He said, what type of dictator am I if I can't get all of these decrees? But it was a much more nuanced system than the dictator just saying this has to be done. He has to bargain, manipulate, negotiate with all of these sinecures of power, and it's not that simple, just to give an order. But I saw him grow much more comfortable with power, especially as he surrounded himself with his loyalists after 2005, 2006. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but when it's an authoritarian system, that means he's becoming much more comfortable being an authoritarian leader.
Yeah, yeah,
And I could see that. And I could see the alternate. This is what Roger Owen talks about in that book I mentioned earlier. That these alternate realities are constructed around these authoritarian leaders by the sycophants, the yes men and so forth, who support him and part of his inner circle. And even as professors, we get a big head when students give us these incredible, student evaluations that are totally unwarranted, are totally ridiculous. Like Dr. Lesch knows everything in the world. It's like, really? But, so we get little big heads, but when you're in a position of an authoritarian leader and these people and I've been with these people, they think of him as a savior. He's saved the country. He's going to move the country forward. And he starts hearing this over and over again. And you start to believe it. The old cliche, absolute power corrupts absolutely is a cliche
yeah.
for a reason. Now, he was always, again, very, unpretentious and kind and prompt, which was very different from his father.
Wow.
Father used to make people wait, made Kissinger wait, for hours. And that's a power play, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
telling the other person I'm more important than you are. Bashar, with me and most everyone else he met, it was right on time. And it was choreographed and right on time always.
Dr. Lesch, you used the word unpretentious several times, and I
Mhm.
alluded to that in sort of my assessment of him based on what I've read. Did you always meet in the presidential palace, or was it ever that you sort of met? I don't want to be silly and say a cafe. He was the president of the country,
Right,
but
right.
in less pretentious, less opulent, and normal environments.
Adele, it was interesting. I was on ABC News Live, their streaming service yesterday, and right before I went on, they had this whole thing about the People's Palace, Qasr al-Shab, uh, the Wizard of Oz like palace
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that sits up top Damascus, looks down
Yeah. It's on
Damascus.
TV now all the time.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
yeah,
it's on TV. It's been
yeah.
sacked and all that sort of stuff. And they were saying this is how he lived and all this sort of thing. And I came on. I said, they probably didn't like this, but I said no, wasn't really the case. He hardly spent any
Oh,
time in that palace.
seriously?
It was for official functions. I went there twice to meet with him only because he had just met one time with Ahmadinejad just before me, and I forget the other person, but it was he was already there, and so they drove me up. All the other times, or most of the other times, were in his quite modest Rauda office building in the part of town of Damascus called Rauda, which was just like a 3, 4 story, very modest looking building.
Oh,
And he lived, for the most part, in a similar building close by, to the point where, you look out the windows. I remember Osman al-Assad saying, I look out the windows and I'd see the neighbors next door, in a similar 3, 4 story building. And again, that's part of what endeared him, it's certainly the beginning and
yeah.
through his first 10 years, really, to a lot of Syrians, and his father was very modest too.
I
In
see.
fact, when I was interviewing Bashar for the biography, um, he allowed me to meet with his teachers and uh, freely and openly. Um, and they told me that, oh, he failed math, or he was a troublemaker in this and had to be switched to another school. So in other words, they weren't afraid to show this side of him, that he wasn't a straight A student
Yeah.
and so forth. And the teachers felt okay telling me that. And it always, brings me in contrast to, remember Saddam Hussein's son, Uday and Qusay, who had their bodyguards threaten the teachers, to give them
Yeah,
A's.
yeah,
So it's very, very different, very, very different family type structure than what I understand many other dictator type families to be.
with Bashar himself, were you at liberty to ask him whatever you want? Were there topics that were just
Um,
not
only
allowed?
almost everything was allowed except perhaps you know um, something having to do with military strategic uh, uh, implications. Um,
That's a very wide latitude.
it's very wide. Now, I
Yeah.
asked him. I saw him shortly after former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri was assassinated in February 2005, and it was, as you recall, it was blamed on Syria at the time,
Yeah, yeah,
Bashar
yeah,
al-Assad.
yeah.
And I met with him about a month later uh, in order to cover this for the biography that was coming out. And I sat down. I said, "Did you kill him? Did you have?" I didn't say,
Wow.
"Did you have him ordered killed?" And he goes, "No." I wanted to see his reaction. Did he look me in the eye? That whole thing, and he did. I have my own theory on that, on what happened there, but so everything was pretty much, and we had a nice rapport in that regard, and I would challenge him on some things. We may get to this or not, but in 2007 November, I arrived in Damascus. As I said earlier, I usually was welcomed with a car on the airport, tarmac, and then driven to the VIP room, and they took care of my passport and all that, and whisked right through. So it was all very nice. That was very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
On occasion, I had to go through customs if the protocol office was busy with somebody else. So this time in November 2007, I went and no one met me. I said, "Oh, that's okay. I'll go through customs, and it's usually not very crowded anyway." I went in and I was stopped, and they said I was on a blacklist. This is
A
someone who's meeting with
blacklist.
the president. Yeah,
Yeah.
a blacklist, which it's not something you want to be on when you go to Syria. And so I was brought to a room with no windows. I knew what was going to happen. A colonel, there were some military guys. A colonel comes in and for 3 hours interrogated me and said, "What are you doing in the country?" You know how it works when they interrogate. They ask you the same question about 50 different ways to try to see if you're consistent
Which
with
is
your.
strange because you're meeting with their president.
I'm meeting with the president the next morning. Meeting with Bashar. I told him I am here meeting with your president the next morning. And he twirled the gun one time in front of me, like Russian roulette, trying to
Yeah, yeah,
intimidate
yeah,
me. I didn't really fear, for my life or getting tortured. I thought they just might put me on the next plane out wherever.
yeah.
But for 3 hours this went on. Finally, I convinced him to call the office of the president, and he called the office of the president. And it was almost worth the 3 hours of interrogation to see his mouth drop wide open and go, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And then he turns toward me, he comes over, he says, "I'm so sorry. They said you've written a book this about the president and that you are meeting with him tomorrow. I'm so sorry," and all that. And he said, "Can I have your autograph?" Believe this? And he
Did
couldn't
you
find
give
a
him your autograph?
I gave him yeah, he couldn't find a piece of paper, so I signed the back of the blacklist that had my name on
Oh
it.
my God. You
And then he
can't make
cleared the
this up.
way. He got a car and brought me to the Sheraton Hotel in Umayyad Square in Damascus. The next morning, I saw the president early on, 9 o'clock sharp. And as he usually does, "How was your trip?" And I said, other than the 3 hour interrogation, it was great. And he goes, "What? What is this?" And he brings his assistant, "Find out what happened. I'm so sorry that this will never happen again." It did happen the next February, but it was the same colonel, and he hugged me. So anyway, I was still on the blacklist, but uh, and so after that, we sat down. I said, "Mr. President, you got to get control of these guys, i.e., security, the mukhabarat. You got
Yeah.
to get control of these guys, or else they're going to come back to haunt you." And
You said that to him?
I said that to him, yeah.
What did he say?
And he said, I know they engage in excess, but I need them. This is a dangerous neighborhood. I have threats all over the place, and sometimes they go overboard. Well, they went overboard a lot, then a lot more
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sometimes. But
Uh,
yeah,
Dr. Lesch, you're talking about overboard, and I I, I want to ask this question in the minute we have left of this segment.
okay.
Uh, for me and our audience, please repeat the word for hope in Arabic.
Amal, Amal.
So when does Amal, this period of love affair and hope with
Mm.
Bashar, end? Was there an event after 2000 somewhere? I don't know, pick a date. You're going to tell me that they say, oh, our hope was in vain. They realized that this is not turning out to be the Amal that they thought it would be.
All right. Well, I'll give you two answers. One, for me personally, was that time I was with him in the 2007 election. When did I tell you that?
No, no, please
Okay.
do.
I'm getting my interviews mixed up. I'm so sorry. Well, he got reelected to his second 7 year term, presidential terms in Syria, 7 years in 2007 in June, and I was with him in his office building when he received the news that he had garnered 97% of the vote.
Woo,
Yeah,
landslide.
seriously.
Yeah,
Now, as you know, it's a sham election.
of
There's
course.
one person running. It's a yes/no ballot referendum. And I went to some of the polling places the night before, and there's no privacy. You have to do it open, and there's security all around. So it would take the intrepid voter to vote no, to tick the no.
Yeah.
There was pro Bashar. I think there were bands playing pro Bashar music in the polling place. So it was a total sham. And the guy I got to know when I told him, so when he was informed of that, I said, "So what do you think of that?" The guy I got to know, I thought he would say, "Oh, I know it's nothing." I thought he'd say, it's more important to look at turnout rather than
Yeah.
the actual vote. But instead, he sat back and said, "They love me. They love me."
Oh,
And
wow.
that's when I saw, oh boy. you've drunk the Kool-Aid of power. You're going to be president for life.
Wow.
And
Wow.
because he
Wow.
didn't see it, he didn't understand the difference in it, or didn't want to. Now he'd had a tough few years, so maybe this was cathartic for him to see all this outpouring of affection, which he had eschewed until that time. I said earlier, he didn't like, he had his pictures taken down. He didn't want the same like cult type personality that his
He didn't
that
want people idolize him like his father.
but
Yeah.
now it was beginning. And after that point,
Wow.
you could see the big banners and the photo, the whole cult-like thing start again.
So what was
Now,
the second
second
event?
one, this was for the Syrian people, March 30th, 2011. Just after the uprising began, you know, for 2 weeks, Bashar hadn't been seen, hadn't responded to the simmering, protests.
You were referring to the Arab Spring?
Arab Spring, yeah,
Hmm.
in Syria.
Yep.
And in March 30th, 2011, he gave his first speech, public speech, to talk about the uprising that had been occurring for 2 weeks. He gave it on national TV to Syrian parliament. And everyone was hoping, and again, a lot of the Syrian opposition military leaders I interviewed during the war in northern Syria, in Gaziantep, just across the border into Turkey. I interviewed probably over the years, probably 100 of them. Almost to a person, they said, if Bashar had given the speech that they were hoping for in terms of making concessions, in terms of punishing his cousin in the province of Daraa, who was responsible for the roughing up of those teenagers, the torturing of those teenagers who had written graffiti, anti-regime graffiti on a wall. And he didn't. He gave the old, gave a speech that Hafez al-Assad would have been proud of. You
Hmm.
know, external influence, terrorists internally. We're strong. We're going to, not necessarily crack down on them, but we're going to be strong and we're not going to give in. So it was that type of speech. And again, to a person, these militia leaders, opposition fighters that I interviewed, they were saying when they heard that, they were done. They said he's
What a
never going to
missed
make it.
opportunity for him.
What a missed opportunity. What a
Wow.
missed
Wow.
opportunity.
Let's take a break here. In the next segment, I'll ask Dr. Lesch about the Assad family and the Alawites, which you refer to a small minority group in Syria that ruled over the entire population. And I'll also ask him this question. Why do you think, Dr. Lesch, that Syria is known in the world for all the wrong reasons? We'll be
Ah,
right back.
okay.
Dr. Lesch, the Assad family were members of the Alawite sect. Is that correct?
That's correct. They're not associated. They were alloys.
They were Alawites, yeah, because sometimes we hear or read about how they were affiliated. So, were there like a clan within the Alawites? Were they the leaders of the Alawites?
Yeah,
How does that work?
they were from a leading clan.
Hmm.
Not all the clans got along, but they tended to coalesce because they were a minority sect, a long repressed and oppressed sect in Syria, and so only strength through numbers could they survive, and they were usually very much the lower classes. And what you saw happen is when the French had the mandate power over Syria between World War I and World War II, they formed what was called a troupe spéciale, kind of a local militia force. Well, most of the population was unwilling to serve for a French, type of uh, military group.
So we're
And
talking 1920s,
yeah,
19.
20s, 30s,
Yeah, yeah.
1920s, 30s into the 40s. Certainly Sunnis and others, it was a betrayal of Arab nationalism or betrayal of of the attempt to get independence from the French. So the Alawites, in disproportional numbers, joined and
Hmm.
were recruited by the French, as were some Christians and Druze. And so they achieved this Troupe Spéciale became the backbone of the Syrian military when the country gained independence from France in 1946. And so the Alawites were well positioned in the military, disproportionately so,
Oh, wow.
in the aftermath of this. And so when the Ba'ath Party, the socialist Arab nationalist party that formerly came to power in Syria in 1963, but had a very important position in the country in the 1950s, wedded itself in order to get more power against other groups in the country with elements of the military, the Alawites and Druze, but especially the Alawites, including a young Hafez al-Assad, were well positioned in politically, not just militarily. So this is why once they gained power, when the Ba'ath Party came to power, the Alawites had a predominant position, and particularly when Hafez al-Assad and another intra-Ba'ath coup, actually in 1970, came to power, the Alawites were in a predominant position politically and in the military security apparatus, and they weren't going to give it up very easily at all. In fact, interviewing some of these opposition fighters in the Syrian civil war from 2011 and on, they said we hated coming across an Alawite unit, uh, fighting
Why?
the government because they knew, and usually these opposition elements were Sunnis and oftentimes Sunni Salafists or even jihadists.
Yeah.
The Alawite unit would know we're going to kill them all, so they would fight to the death, and so they hated fighting the Alawite,
Wow.
but they're fighting to the death and clinging to power and supported Bashar al-Assad in the civil war for a long time, not so much toward the end, but for a long time because he was protecting the sect. They may not have liked him, some of them, and some of them didn't. Some Alawites didn't. Majority did, but or supported him, but some didn't. But he was their protector. It was this, the Alawite fortress that he had to protect. And so, they weren't going to give up power very easily. They were going to fight tooth and nail to keep it at the time.
So, in preparing for this conversation, I went back to the Alawites, and this is something I can't quite figure out. They are Shiite, but not really. Is that
Your guess is as good as mine because it's a very,
it?
it's a very esoteric sect, and I have, in fact, I have an Alawite in. I taught a course every fall on history of Syria. I have an Alawite, Syrian Alawite, in my class. In fact, I'm going to see her about her final paper right after this conversation.
Okay.
And you know, we talked about the Alawites in class, and I asked her, so is that correct? Is that your view of it? And she goes, I don't know. It's such a secretive fact and everything.
Yeah,
But it's a combination. Ali, the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, is the bearer of divine essence. Basically almost apotheosizing him and giving him divine features, which is why they're called Alawites, followers of Ali. And they include elements of obviously Islam, but also Christianity, Persian Zoroastrianism,
oh,
uh,
wow.
yeah, Gnosticism. It's a very mystical type of thing with this, what's called the Batiniya in Arabic or in Islamic language, which is a hidden, esoteric knowledge that only a few of the leaders of this sect have. So that they are uh, followers of Ali, which, by the way, Shiite, the full name of Shiite Muslims is Shiatu Ali, which means followers of Ali.
Yeah.
So there is a close relationship there, and yeah, sometimes they're described as a schism of, as are the Druze, a schism of Twelver Shiism, the main line, as are Ismailis and Zaidis are schisms of the main Twelver line, and sometimes, I mean, even Twelver Shiite Muslims, for the most part, do not consider Alawites to be Muslims. In fact, Hafez al-Assad negotiated with Musa Asadr, who was a prominent Shiite imam living in Lebanon. And because Syria had an important role in Lebanon, dominated Lebanon after from 1976 on, basically uh, until 2006, um, Hafez al-Assad compelled or asked Imam Musa Sadr to say that Alawites are actually Shiites. They're actually, and so now it was okay to have this relationship with 12 or
So
Muslim.
did Imam Musa says say it? Say that
Yeah,
they're
he did.
Shiites?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he did.
I was going to say that based on what you just described, this sort of combination or composite of Zoroastrianism and other, or Christianity and almost, for lack of a better word on my part, deity of Ali, a
Mhm.
son-in-law of Muhammad, and that's nothing like the Shiaism in
Oh.
Iran. In fact, there is a sect in Iran that is, I think, illegal. Certainly is illegal. Yeah, that they thought of Ali as God, but well, that's really interesting.
In fact, if you drive around Syria, Alawite-dominated villages, you won't see the minarets or mosques
You
or
won't?
anything because they don't pray in mosques. That's the Gnostic part of Alawism is this inner spiritual rather than interspiritual ideology and process and methodology rather than the orthodox trappings of religion or Islam.
So
So
no Friday prayer.
no, no,
Do they pray 5 times a day?
no.
Oh, wow. So that
Yeah,
doesn't
so now you can see why some don't even consider them to be Muslim,
Oh,
but
that's really fascinating. And
yeah.
they're only, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Dr. Lesch, they're 13%
Yeah, somewhere around that, between 10 to 13%
of Syria's
of the
population.
country before the Civil War. I mean, all these percentages, there's going to have to be a census and demographic census taken 5 years from now because, so many people left. Christians,
Yeah,
now
yeah.
a lot of Alawites are leaving. There's so many refugees, in many different countries that perhaps now will return. So there has to be a new census, and so all these figures that are being thrown around are before the Civil War.
I see. You've written many books, and as I was reviewing them to ask follow-up questions, one of the things that I decided to ask you and uh, put the ball in your court is this.
Mhm.
In post World War One history of Syria, we can even come closer. We can come, since the Assad family, if you wish. What are some of the big inflection points
Mhm.
that you can say, aha, this is what changed? For example, if it was Iran, I would talk about the constitutional revolution of 1906. I would talk about the CIA coup in
Mossadegh, yeah.
1950. Yeah, yeah.
Um, I'll go just before Assad came to power in 1970, and that's the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, when Israel in 6 days defeated the combined Arab armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria primarily. And from Syria, that's when they took the Golan Heights.
Mhm.
Hafez al-Assad was defense minister at the time and commander of the Air Force. So it was a personal thing to him losing the Golan Heights. They lost the high ground, which is why Israel took it, as
Yeah,
well
yeah.
as the tributaries that led into the Jordan River, the lifeblood of Israel. So it was a strategic takeover. To Syria, it was it was this incredible injustice. Uh, it was humiliating in many ways. And every time I went to Syria, I started going to Syria. When did I start going to Syria? 1989, I guess. It was my first time to Syria. I've been there about 30, 35 times
Wow.
before um, during the Civil War and certainly before what happened recently. And almost every single time, especially because I'm an American and they think,
Yeah.
of course, the United States supports Israel, some official, they'd start complaining about the Golan Heights that, and the Palestinians, we can't, until
Yeah.
this injustice is done. And sometimes they start crying. It became such an emotional,
Wow.
a very emotional issue. And it became the defining element of Hafez al-Assad's foreign policy and many ways domestic policy. And so that episode, and it did it the whole Arab world. That's when Osama bin Laden became really Osama bin Laden, was after that defeat. And when
You mean
Nasser,
after the Golden Heights were taken after 1967? Is that what you mean?
well, for Egypt, after they lost, the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, Jordan lost the West Bank, including Arab East Jerusalem. I mean, this was the most humiliating day in modern Arab history
Yeah.
when Israel defeated the entire Arab world, because there were contingents of troops from all over the Arab world.
Yeah.
And so this became a defining element across the Arab world. It led to Nasser's uh, diminution,
Hmm.
certainly after that, and the end of Nasserism, and really the end of secular Arab nationalism in general. And for Syria, it became a defining moment that so colored every
Wow.
aspect of Syrian society. Foreign policy absolutely became their primary foreign policy to recover the Golan Heights, which affected domestic policy because everything had to be put toward defense and away from other elements of the economy to protect against Israel in order to try to get the Golan Heights back, and in society as a whole. Um,
Wow.
so that's one I would definitely circle in terms of an inflection point.
And did this continue till um, the 21st century in
Oh,
your visit?
absolutely, absolutely. Bashar,
He
I
brought
remember
it up to
one
you?
time, I remember one time sitting with him, I think it was 2008 or so, and we were talking about policy actually, and I was saying, so what would it take? Americans are interested. What would it would take for you to break from Iran and Hezbollah, or at least reduce their footprint? And he sat back and he said, and he closed his eyes and looked up he said, if I can get the Golan Heights back, I will be a hero. And so of course, this is when he's the son of Hafez al-Assad. So
Yeah.
that paradigm affected his own, Weltanschauung, his global outlook and regional outlook and domestic policy. And that was very, very important to him. And what's interesting now, Adele, is that since the Syrian civil war has so shaped the views of an entire generation of Syrians, especially young Syrians who came politically aware during the civil war, their first and foremost thought is not the Golan Heights. They're not thinking about they could care less about the Golan
Yeah.
Heights.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're thinking about the Civil War. They're thinking about getting their home back, or now, about what's going to happen now in Syria after the overthrow or the fall of Assad.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see if the Golan Heights remains important, in any sort of serious way moving forward.
Dr. Lesch, one of the questions that I've been very eager to ask you, and I forgot to ask in the last segment, is this. The title of your book is Syria, the Fall of the House of Assad. But you wrote this book in 2012, and the book obviously has a portend, the fall of the House of Assad. So, did you think it would take this long?
So don't I get credit for being righted even if it's
No,
12
no,
years later? I mean,
you do
yeah,
get
yeah.
the credit, hence why
No,
I'm
no.
mentioning it
Actually,
here.
it's an interesting and funny story. One, as you know, I mean, publishers. This was Yale University Press. Publishers have a more say in the title of a book than the authors in many cases. And they
Yeah,
wanted, in a heyday, they wanted something a little juicy. And so they came up with that. And I said, as long as you put a question mark at the end. And so
yeah.
at the very end, they said, we can't do the question mark. And I probably should have balked at that, but it went forward without the question mark. But what's interesting is that at the end of the book, I map out different scenarios. What's the
Yeah,
most
yeah.
likely scenario to happen? And I said the most likely scenario to happen, I was the only one saying it at the time, is that Bashar al-Assad is going to remain in power for some time. And despite the title of the book, I predicted he would stay in power for some time. But I did say he had lost his legitimacy and he had lost that level of popularity that he had enjoyed, to some level the first 10 years. And so that's not nothing.
And this
But
book comes after the March 30th, 2011
correct,
speech that you were telling us about.
correct, correct. And so, I could see some of the problems and writing on the wall, so to speak. But I knew that his government would be a tough nut to overthrow, as opposed to what happened in Egypt or Tunisia or Libya during the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
because it was allied. These were Alawites, and they were going to hang together, sink or swim together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he had supporters on the outside that was already known. I mean, Iran and Hezbollah, and then Russia a little bit later, that were much more willing and able to help their ally, the Syrian government, than all the other outside powers like the U.S. or Turkey or Saudi Arabia were willing to do to help the opposition, the fragmented opposition.
Yeah. Did you give up after a while? They were still in power. Assad was still in power for 12
No,
years.
again, that's what I thought. I thought he would remain in power. I
Yeah.
didn't give a date when he would fall. I said, he lost his legitimacy, so I guess it could be undermined at some point. And didn't think it would happen this way and this quickly as it did. But I guess what's going to happen is people are going to see that and they're going to say they're going to get the book. They go, oh wow, he's like right on time, right on target. Then they're going to see it's 2013. The updated
Yeah.
edition came out in 2013. They're going to say, what's that? Just as you said, why did he write this in 2013?
Well,
So that's the story.
you were clairvoyant, even if early. That's okay. To close our conversation, I want to ask you um, a small question that has intrigued me for years on, and that is the union, which is sort of crazy thing that I read many, many years ago. Then I started digging into it. Union of Egypt and Syria. I think it was in the early 1960s.
1958. It was
Yeah.
September 1958, and it lasted till February 1961. Or excuse me, it started in February 1958, lasted till September 1961.
So they don't share a border.
Mhm.
How did this idea come as like a crazy proposition? How did this even come
This is
about?
very complicated. This is
I
very
bet it
complicated.
is. Uh,
Um,
Give me
I
a
guess
Cliff's Notes
two things.
version of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, we'll see here. I'm an academic. I don't think we can do Cliff Notes or
that's
anything,
true.
but
That's
I'll
true.
give it my best shot. Two things. One, uh, Nasserist pan-Arabism. It wasn't even called Arab nationalism or pan-Arab. It was Nasserism. He so dominated, Egyptian
Oh,
President Gamal Abdel Nasser so dominated the Middle East at the time, the Arab world at the time. And, in post-Suez War, euphoria, all of these types of things. And so everyone was looking to merge. I mean, maybe this was the final moment. This was the heyday of Arab Nation. Maybe, countries could actually merge and uh,
oh.
and snuff out,
When you say everyone, so this is not just Syria.
not
Everyone
just
would,
here, other countries are elements in these countries,
huh?
we're talking about it. And so there was the U.S. attempted to overthrow the Syrian regime. And in fact, that was my first book I wrote, was about this episode in the fall of 1957, what I call the American Syrian crisis. It was uncovered. It spiraled into a regional and then a superpower confrontation between the U.S. and Soviet Union over Syria. And Nasser kind of swooped in to perceive to the Syrian population to save the day. He sent 5,000 troops there, which was woefully inadequate to keep anybody away. But he was matching, deeds with words, or words with deeds. And so the Ba'ath Party, which was in its not infancy, but it was fairly important still. They figured they'd take advantage of this and suggest to Nasser that they merge. And Nasser really didn't want to. He really wasn't an Arab nationalist. He was an Egyptian nationalist, but he had become captive to his own rhetoric, and so he couldn't say no. Become public, and so they merged. And essentially, it didn't last all that long because it wasn't a good fit. Syria and Egypt are very different. Nasser and his forces had dominated Syria. His generals ran the combined military and stuff like that, and most of the Syrian political class, some went into exile, some were reduced in importance. They finally, in 1961, said enough of this, and so they seceded. But it just wasn't a good
Interesting.
fit.
You would think, why would a country willingly um, commit themselves to be sort of
Yeah.
subsidiary to another country? And I think you just answered that. It was Arab nationalism or Nasserism. Dr. Lesch, thank you so much for educating me and our audience. And to our audience, if you know of any history that could provide more perspective from the past on this subject, please share it with us and tell us what's your perspective. Thank you so much, Dr. Lesch.
A real pleasure. Thank you.